Hello everybody, my name is Spoons Rattling, and today we are doing the inverse of my last video, where we're rating the worst value kits in 40k instead of the best value kits. Let's get into it. Now, of course, we start with the Space Marines, and honestly, the Space Marines don't have too many bad value kits, but I give the cake to the Infiltrators here, which they are good models, but their points per dollars for Marines are quite bad at 1.25, even being worse than some of the Primaris Lieutenant kits. Next is the Grey Knights. I think you guys get the deal. They can't use the core stuff, so they have to be here. And as a rule of thumb, the Grey Knights have insanely good points per dollar, but their worst kit is actually the Rhino, which is 75 points for $55 or 1.36 points per dollar. Next, it's the Sisters, and really this one was sort of a battle for the worst, and unsurprisingly, it's one of their small characters, the Hospitaller, which is at 0.87 points per dollar because she's only 35 points, but she costs $40. Next up is the Adeptus Custodes, and unsurprisingly, the actual Custodes are not the worst value kits here. It is the Prosecutors. If you run them as a squad of four, you only get 40 points for $60, which is 0.66 points per dollar. But since then you would not be using everything in the kit, we have to run them as a 5-man squad at 0.83 points per dollar, as you'd be getting 50 points instead of 60. Next, it's the Adeptus Mechanicus, and like the Sisters of Battle, they tend to be quite bad value, but the absolute worst of it is actually the Sidonian Dragoons with Radium Jezzails. You can see this wonderful paint scheme done by Colorful Savage on DeviantArt. But at 45 points for $60, you only get 0.75 points per dollar, which is the lowest we've seen so far. Next is the Imperial Guard, another famously pricey faction given how many infantry you need to field, and their worst kit is the Commissar. He's only 30 points, but at $35, you only get 0.85 points per dollar. Next, we have the Imperial Knights, who of course are ahead of the pack in literally every single way. But if you build the Knight kit as a Gallant, you only get 2.35 points per dollars. So, again, still better than literally everything else on this list. Under the Forces of Chaos, starting with the Demons. The Demons generally have pretty alright points per dollar, but the worst is actually the Nurglings, which at, again, 35 points for $35, have a low but kind of satisfying 1 point per dollar, which, is kind of funny. And the Chaos Space Marines, like the Loyalist Space Marines, tend to have quite good points per dollar, but their worst is actually similar to the Demons. It's $55 for 55 points, a flat 1 point per dollar. Next, we have the Chaos Knights, and the Chaos Knights are more expensive than the Imperial Knights, and if you build the Chaos Knight kit as a Rampager, you get about 2 points per dollar. So again, still ahead of everything, just slightly behind the Imperial Knights. Next are the Death Guard, and the Death Guard have sort of alright points values across the board, but their worst kit is the Icon Bearer, which comes in at 1.3 points per dollar. For 45 points for $33.50, it's very middle of the pack. The Thousand Sons have insanely good value in their Marine boxes, but since they have these little Zangor hangers on, which, much like my opinion on them, they suck. Specifically the Enlightened, they come in at a low 0.75 points per dollars, tying them with the AdMech. The World Eaters tend to have pretty good points across the board, but their worst kit is actually the Chaos Spawn, as you only get 1.18 points per dollar. The Forces of the Xenos next, and the Eldar tend to have very high points cost for their units, even, given how strong they are. But the worst are just the Rangers. They come in at 0.91 points per dollar at 55 points for $60, making them very weak for Eldar, but actually sort of middle of the pack in terms of this list. The Jakari have fairly mediocre points crosses, like across everything in terms of points per dollar, but they're easily the worst thing is the Kronos Paint Engine, as it is 50 points for $60 or 0.83 points per dollar. The Gene Stealer Colts are funny in these videos because in 10th edition they had like the lowest points costs in the game, but in 10th they actually have pretty good point values. And much like the Death Guard, the Locust is 45 points for $33.50, which is a very low 1.34 points per dollar. But again, that actually puts them near the head of the pack. But actually very bad for Gene Stealer Colts, which is an interesting thing to see. And in perhaps the complete opposite effect, the Leagues of Votann in 9th edition were extremely pricey in terms of points, and in 10th edition they aren't. But their worst value kit is the Brokir Ironmaster, coming in at 1.18 points per dollar. The Necrons tend to be like one of the sleeper hits of being one of the cheaper armies to collect, but their worst kit is easily just the single destroyer, which I don't think anyone has ever bought unless they need to make a Necron destroyer lord. But the single destroyer is $29 for 30 points, just barely over 1 point per dollar. The Orcs have a lot of very cheap units, but they're sort of king of bad value for points, are the mech guns. At 55 points for $60, they come in at 0.91 points per dollar. The Tau tend to have some of the worst points values for their money, but the ultimate exemplar of that is not the Tau, but the Kroot Hounds. They are 30 points at $33.50, or 0.89 points per dollar. The Tyranids have a wide spread of units covering the whole spectrum, from very big monsters that cost a lot of points to very small things that cost almost no points. But actually, it's one of the medium beasts that takes the cake. The Pyrovore is 30 points for $50, putting it at the lowest 0.6 points per dollar, which is the worst by far. Let's get into the final rankings. And unsurprisingly, the Pyrovore takes the worst of the worst list, being 0.6 points per dollar, followed up closely by the Zangor and the Radium Giselle Dragoons at 0.7 points per dollar, and the Kronos comes in third at 0.83 points per dollar. You could have also put the Sisters of Silence here, but it's the same thing, ultimately. Anyways, I have been Spoons Rattling. I hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time.